Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're and whenever you're deciding to watch this. I hope you guys are having an awesome day. I am looking at the chat right now and seeing already we have like a comment. Wait, what? Excel? Yeah, Excel add-ons? Yeah, well, hold up. I have a cover blocking the name here by HUXN. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. HUXN Web Dev. Yes, that's right. Apparently, Excel is a lot more powerful than back in the old days now. So get ready to be amazed with what we're going to be talking about. Hello to Killian, Matthew, Cloud, Liven. Hope you guys are all ready for this. We have two awesome guests. Mainly driven by Chris, but Chris Gross and Jakob Nielsen are going to be talking about how you create some awesome add-ons with Excel. I think you're going to be pretty amazed about. So Excel is not just for adding 1+1 anymore and doing a couple of fancy charts. So let's go ahead and bring them on, and you guys get ready to ask some nice questions. Chris, Jakob, how you guys doing?
Great.
Can you guys see me?
Yes, I can see you. I think
I can see you too, Chris.
Everybody, drop a 1 if you could see our guests. Drop a 1 in the chat. Chris, let's go ahead and jump right into it and tell us what you're going to be showing us today. Some people are already surprised to be hearing about add-ons that we're going to be talking about, and we got tons of ones, so everybody could see you.
Oh, well, seems like we lost Chris there.
Yeah, I'm sure he's going to come back on, but Jakob, just give us a little summary of what we're going to be chatting on.
Well, what we're going to show today is basically how you start developing an add-in for Excel. And it's one of the modern add-ins where we use web technologies to do that. So what Chris, when he comes back, will show you is how to start your development, set up the development environment, get a project started. And what's exciting about what we're showing today is we're actually going to extend the function library in Excel. You know, Excel has a lot of functions. It's not just 1+1. You can there's thousands of functions you can use. But what we're showing today is basically the ability for you to write your own functions that your users of Excel can then use, and they can come with an add-in. On top of that, we are going to show how to make the custom functions return data types. Data types is a relatively new thing in Excel. Historically, spreadsheets has been about numbers and text. But what we're doing with data types in Excel, and what you can do with your add-ins in Excel, is actually make it's not just numbers and text, but actually structures and objects that users can put on your grid and that you can fill with data. And that's what we're going to show. So let's get Chris started, and we can talk more about what you can do.
I could hear everyone's excited right now, and internally they're all giving you a clap for that good info. So let's go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, sorry about that, everyone. Not sure what happened. The second that Reynold was introducing me, the app that we're using just crashed, and I'm like, oh no. Of course it's going to happen right now when we start. But yeah, thanks for kicking it off, Jakob, and setting some context. I'm excited to be here, excited to talk about everything today. And yeah, we don't have too much time. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get started. So as Jakob mentioned, we'll be talking about Excel add-ins, and in particular, we're going to talk about a new feature we have called data types. We're going to be talking about APIs and code and how you can leverage all that.
Okay.
So as far as the agenda, right, we're going to talk about Excel add-ins, data type APIs, and code. And in particular, I've picked a specific scenario today, and so I'm hoping to entice you all, and you can follow along. And if you're able to follow along, I'm hopeful you can build this stuff too. But it's suffice to say that basically we're going to make a meme generator inside of Excel. So with things like custom functions and these new data type APIs, you can pretty much connect Excel to any service that you might dream of. So the one that I picked in particular today was for a meme function. So we'll design a couple of functions that allow you to actually consume and then generate memes all from Excel, push them to the web. I think it's pretty cool stuff.
That's a high value business scenario right there.
Yes.
It's good that it's soon Friday somewhere so that people can do that on a Friday.
Exactly. Excel's not just for 1+1 anymore, as we were saying.
Yeah, you never know when you're gonna have a meme in your back pocket to throw out there.
Exactly. Impress all your friends, colleagues, coworkers, etc. So yeah, as far as the way that Excel add-ins work, there's a couple variants, but the ones we're talking about today are based off of JavaScript or TypeScript. And this has been a new extension that we've added to the product where if you have something that is basically just a web app, so that can be like just any website you've built or a web app in general, all you need is that web app and then something we call a manifest file. And then those two things together constitute an add-in. And that can run on both Windows, Mac, and the web.
Cool.
Yeah, the last part is really significant. Like you can, develop your add-in once using web technologies, and it allows you to not only run on the operating system that you build it for, or you build it on, but you can actually run it on several others, including in the web browser.
Now, was there a particular event or series of events that led up to the creation of this?
I think it's more of a series of events because Excel, used to be on Windows. Well, actually the first version of Excel was on Mac, but then it came to Windows, and for a long time that was the two sort of endpoints or places that you could run Excel. But that has all changed, and especially with the web coming in, and that means that things also needs to change for add-ins in order, because you wouldn't want to build it for each operating system separately. So now you can build once, and then you can run it everywhere Excel is.
Yeah, that's the beauty of web technologies, right? And I saw some comments too in the chat. Yeah, this is TypeScript instead of Visual Basic, so we're adopting more modern programming languages to do a bunch of this stuff with.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that because I do remember back in the day, as I date myself, that we used to use Visual Basic to do some of the back-end formulas, right?
Yeah, you can still do that, but it's limited in where you can actually run it.
Exactly. Cool. So some of the other things that we'll be talking about just like at a high level are some of the basics of an add-in. Obviously, add-in means a lot of different things, but specifically within Excel, we're looking to allow you to extend many of the surface areas of it. So one of the first ones that you might think about is actually creating your own add-in that has its own custom ribbon tab with its own buttons on it. So you can kind of create your own experiences for your end users. Mm-hmm. We also have a number of UI surfaces, so things like dialogues, task panes. If you check them out in the product today, we actually have a built-in app store within all of the Office products where you can check out different add-ins. But you can download some, but a lot of them you'll find have task pane style experiences, which is pretty good for hosting your own content. And this is basically just an HTML web app that you're seeing there. So more or less everything that you can do on a website, you can do here too.
So the same way Visual Studio Code has its own marketplace, we kind of have like its own little marketplace for Excel, except we're calling it, like it's a store.
Yeah, it's called the add-in store within Excel.
Cool.
Yeah. The other thing that we'll be taking extreme advantage of today is one of my favorite features of Excel. I think personally, being on the Excel team, this is one of the things that makes Excel unique. It's one of the cool things about it, and it's its function language. And so, as Jakob mentioned before, you can actually roll your own functions. And the idea with the stuff that we're doing here is it's really no different, aside from a little bit of metadata that gets generated on build, from just writing a JavaScript function. So if you're able to do that, why not be able to give that a name and pass it over to Excel and take inputs and give outputs?
And we are going to see if you can do that, Chris. Right?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, let's go ahead and see.
Cool. So the other thing that we'll be talking about today is, I think, Jakob, you touched on this a little bit. It's this new feature, or this idea that we have on the product called data types. And so kind of the general talking point we have with this one is, historically with Excel, there was always text and numbers that were contained within individual cells, which is pretty cool. People have built bazillions of solutions all across the world with this and made a lot of great decisions on it. But what happens when you can represent more than just simple text or numbers within an individual cell? And that's kind of the idea of data types. It's almost similar or akin, since we're all talking about code here, I can use programming terminology. It's very similar to like object orientation. So you can kind of think of it in some sense as being like object orientation, which has been added to Excel. And so one example, go for it.
Question that I had in mind, and I'll ask one of the users' questions though. In Excel, how is that different from formatting the cells? Is it actually the content that's the data type itself, or is it the cell? Because we could like format a cell to be, like currency versus integers. So how is that different? Is it the cell, or is it like the actual content that's the data type itself?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's the actual content that's in there. So what you can see in front of you is we've got something that looks a little different. And it looks like the city of Seattle. And the reason for that is because it's our representation from the Bing knowledge graph of Seattle. And so all this information that you can see where it says like admin division, King County, Washington, the country region, there's even more information if you scroll this card view. That's all contained with the object in the cell. And you can actually extract it and use it anywhere in the grid that you want. So you're not limited to just having to do a whole bunch of index matches and reference things. Like this data can actually be contained and be a lot richer than just a simple text string or, as you said, an integer.
Nice. Now, John Smith asks if there's any security concerns or limitations using TypeScript.
Well, in terms of security concerns, I think with this model of web add-ins, it's actually running in a sandbox that's similar to the sandbox that you have in the web browser. So even if it runs inside of the Windows Excel or the Mac Excel, it's still in this browser sandbox that prevents the developer to do horrible things to the machine, like go format the hard drive, delete files, put things on the machine that you don't want it. So we believe that this is a more secure way of doing things compared to some of the other technologies like VBA and COM, where you actually put code on the machine that has a very wide range of things that it can do on that machine.
Right. Because also back in the day, like macros were an issue, right? And was that related to that?
Well, and with macros, you mean VBA script or VBA code? Yeah. That's related to that. Like once if you have a workbook and with VBA and you say, hey, enable the macros and run the macros, it has a lot of things it can do on your machine, good or bad. And those things you don't have with the web add-in approach. It's not specifically tied to TypeScript because this is JavaScript TypeScript. So can I suggest something here? Why don't we move on? Because we have lots of times where we are looking at npm installing or something building and so on. So should we take a lot of questions as we look at the code and that?
Yeah, I'll ask some questions as we go along.
Yeah.
So yeah, continue.
Yeah, the other cool thing that's just worth mentioning is once these things end up in the grid, there's a lot of tight integration that happens, which for a developer I think is great because there's a lot of things when you're going to build an add-in, and we've seen people do this before where you have to go and you kind of have to integrate with different things or you have an idea on how something works. But with data types, a lot of these features that you might be trying to make use of or create are kind of baked into the product. And we have intelligent defaults, which I, again, like to refer to this very similar to programming languages where you have strict typing. And once you have typing on things, you can have different interactions and different things that happen. And the software can generally be more intelligent when it's able to reason over things differently. So like the example we have here is just our sort and filter menus. They're able to just act on all of those new things and do smart stuff based off the fact that we know what that type is and we can reason over it.
I hope that someone on the chat here notices that there was actually an image in a cell.
Yeah.
It's only recently that has come to Excel. We could have images, but they were on top of the grid. They weren't in the cells. And with data types, you can actually create images in cells. And this is just one example, but you can do that on your own. Chris is going to show you how.
Nice.
Yeah, and so that's a good segue because we have some data sources which you can find in the product, which is kind of cool. You can look at stocks or geography. Those are the baked in ones. But really what we're here to talk about is code and the fact that we have new APIs that let you leverage many of these structures that are powering those experiences in the product today. So you can do things like put memes into Excel or whatever service it may be that you're trying to connect to. It really becomes a new extension of the world of types, and whatever type you want to bring over to Excel, you can do that if you're able to program against these APIs. So some of those building blocks that we'll be leveraging today, and they'll just like kind of flow through the code examples. There are a number of things. There's something we have that are called entity values, and those are what I like to informally refer to as objects. So those are like those things we saw before where you can have nesting of them. You can have an object inside of another object. An object can contain arrays inside of it. It can contain other bits of data with it. And you can programmatically access that as a developer and make it available to your end users within the spreadsheet. The other evolution we have is something we call a formatted number value. I think you hit the nail on the head with this one earlier, Reynold, where you could have data in the cell with Excel, and then you can click that format button. But all it's really doing is applying something to the cell. You haven't actually transformed the value or anything. And so this is an evolution of that, where you can actually contain that format with the value, and then that can travel through calculations and also be spit out from functions. So like in this example, we've got a stock history function that exists in the product, but it's able to actually spit out the right price based on the market that you're from. So if you're in US currencies, it'll come out in dollars. If you're in, say, Japanese ones, it'll be yen. If you're trading on a different stock market that uses euros, it'll come out that way too.
Cool.
Yeah. And Jakob mentioned web images. Those are one of my favorite ones because you can actually pump images into the product and have them act in cells and stuff, which is pretty cool and enables us to do things like make memes in Excel.
Nice.
Yeah, the last point I wanted to make was a bit of the pattern that we're going to be doing today, and then we'll switch over and spend the rest of the time looking at some code once we see what the schema looks like. But I mentioned before that part of the design choices that we made with this stuff was making it easier for developers to get things done faster. And one of the patterns that exists today is the world of services. So basically, our code pattern that we're going to do is we're just going to do the thing you do a lot of times in JavaScript, which is we're going to call a REST API using fetch. That's going to give us some JSON back. In this case, we're going to talk to a meme service. Then once we get that data back, we just have to do a bit of transformation to apply the schema that Excel uses to represent the data. Then we pass that over to Excel, and Excel handles the rest for us. So as far as code that we end up writing, it ends up being pretty simple to do some pretty powerful things that you would never dream of being possible.
The approach that you're describing now, they apply to charts also. We have a user that was asking, hey, what about charts? Are we able to create charts also?
Yeah, so charts are supported as part of just the general Office add-in framework, but we're not going to be doing anything in particular with charts. And data types do have their own specific integrations with charts and ways that charts handle them, but we won't be doing anything specific with charts today. All right, the last thing I'm going to mention is the new API that we're going to be calling. If anyone here has done any Office add-in development, an API that you frequently call is this one called range.values.
Right.
Basically what that does is kind of like it probably reads. You can have a range within the grid, and then you can pump data in and out from it. So in the old world, you could do things like write numbers and text, but we have a new version of that API that we call values as JSON, where you can actually have those data types included. So in this kind of silly example, I've got the value 1 in the text string llama, but you could imagine instead of returning that text string, I could actually define a web image and spit that out in the cell for a much richer experience that kind of demonstrates that, hey, this is actually a llama. It feels more like a llama. It's a pictorial representation.
Right. Nice.
And then the schema we'll be applying, and then we're going to switch over to code. Looks a bit like this. So each of those different structures I mentioned have different properties associated with them. I obviously have them memorized, and you can reference them in our documentation if you're interested in learning more about it after we're done. But the thing that really drives a lot of how Excel represents stuff is this type field right here. So in this case, this one's a web image, this one's that formatted number, and then this is that entity one. And these are the two structures we'll be making use of today, or the image and the entity.
All right. Cool.
All right.
Chris, is there any chance you can adjust your volume down a little bit?
I can, and hopefully I just did, and that's coming through.
So we're moving on to the code section right now, right?
Yeah, so let's get started with some coding.
We're excited.
Okay, so first thing, that was memes I was looking at. First thing that you need to do to get started with all this, that I've done ahead of time, is you need to have Node installed, which if many of your web developers, you probably have Node already. But you need Node, and then you need this tool that we have created called the Yeoman generator. And so our whole project is going to get kicked off by running a simple command that's going to generate a project for us, and that's what I'm going to do right now. But yeah, if you're interested in following along or getting started, you'll need something called the Yeoman generator in Node.
Now, Yeoman generator, Yeoman's been around for a while, right? So you're saying you created that, or it's something similar to Yeoman? And
what we created was a set of templates for Yo, and this is
Okay.
what Chris is showing. So there's some different kind of projects that will all use a template to start an add-in project.
Got it.
Yeah, and so if you saw right here, I just called the Yo Office templates, which picks from our templates. And so what you'll be presented with is what we're seeing on the screen, which is what type of add-in do you want to do? Obviously, we're talking about Excel today, but you could do something like make an Outlook add-in. There's other add-ins as well. And in particular, we want one with that custom functions integration. So I'll select that. And then it also gives you the option of which language you want to use. And I'll be using TypeScript today. The final thing is what we want to name our add-in. So we're going to call this our meme add-in.
Mm-hmm.
Hit enter, and then Yeoman does its job. I can go get a cup of coffee or whatever, but it's going to spit out a whole bunch of commands and basically build our project for us.
While it's doing this, someone asked, hey, how do we migrate old code base in VBA to TypeScript?
Well, it would be wonderful if there was some tools, and I hope that someday that there will be someone that would write a tool that could take VBA code and actually make the equivalent TypeScript or JavaScript code for it. The API shape is more or less the same between the VBA COM and the TypeScript JavaScript, so many of the things you can move over. If you're doing something that's very specific to VBA, such as calling things in the operating system or something like that, then you have to find other solutions for that. So it's not everything that you can move over.
Okay. So Alexis Fraga, that's the user that asked that. So I'm sure they're thankful for that answer. What else do we have here?
And while you're looking for other comments, I did run, so our project was generated. I changed directory to the folder, and then I just ran an npm run build to basically build our entire project so we can actually flip over to Visual Studio.
Can GitHub Copilot do this?
I'm not familiar with GitHub Copilot, so I don't know that I can answer that question.
I have to draw a blank as well on GitHub Copilot, but what I'll do is check it out and maybe come back later in this call to talk about that.
All right.
Yeah, and so we're over in Visual Studio now, as you can see. And the first thing I'm going to do is kick off an actual run of this. So what's going to happen is we're going to pick Excel Desktop. You'll see a number of options here, but we want the Edge Chromium version. And when I hit run on this, it's going to run our npm commands. But basically, it's going to spin up a web server that's going to host all that content because we need a local host to actually serve content to Excel. And that's what you're seeing here in Webpack. And then it'll spin up Excel on the side too and load our things. Also, another good point in time for us to field some more questions because first time you boot this up, it can take a little bit of time.
Okay. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't done it before, like with your font, so that could be a little bit.
Yes, let me do that.
Guys, and there was a clarification regarding my last question. They meant maybe Copilot can convert VBA to TypeScript.
That would be wonderful. I have not heard about that.
Okay. So that's something we'd have to like look into.
But it sounds like a great idea for a feature for Copilot.
Hale Green, yeah, Chris adjusted his volume, so hopefully you're cool with it. But you asked that at 11:19, so he had adjusted his volume afterwards.
Yeah, and it's pretty easy for me to. I've got a mixer next to me, so I can make myself really loud, really soft, pipe in music, whatever. So if I need to change it, let me know. Cool. So while we were talking about that, this is actually completed. It looks like it's booted up Excel and our new add-in's been loaded. One thing that I've gone ahead and done is added a breakpoint. Because this add-in, this is just the template one. So this one isn't obviously too interesting. It's just meant to get you started, kind of like the hello world. Mm-hmm. But what this code's doing right here is it grabs a selected range, then it loads that range, and then it just formats that range yellow, and then spits out to the console log the address that we got. And so what I'm going to do is show how debugging works, where that breakpoint catches, and then we'll move on with other debugging bits and start generating our add-in.
Now, after you ran the Yeoman generators, so it created it created a template as a starting base that you could like start writing some code in, right?
Yes.
Okay. And is this the screen that we're looking at right now, the settings, like, is that like the first screen that if I was starting from scratch would go into to start adding code to, or is this another screen that you added later on after you've made a series of other changes?
No, this is all from, so Yeoman generated the output, then we did an npm run build, which basically took our source files and then made a bunch of them that land in this distribution folder. And this is what actually gets served over to Excel. And so what you're seeing here is in particular, there's 3 folders under source. One called commands, that's for ribbon stuff. One called functions, that's our custom functions. And then this one called task pane, which contains 3 files. So you've got an HTML file. This is what gets served within that task pane, CSS for styling. And then this TypeScript file is what happens when the add-in runs. So you can see there's a run function that gets called here. Then it waits for Excel, takes some context and does a bunch of stuff. So now if I flip over here, you'll see in the top right-hand corner that we actually have a task pane add-in now. So it says show task pane. What I can do is click on that, and it's going to give me this little dialog that says, hey, I want to attach to VS Code so that you can debug stuff. Obviously, that's what we're here to do, so I'll click OK. And you'll see our task pane add-in gets loaded. It's got some logos and stuff, and if I hit run, and the demo gods are playing nice with me today, we should actually see VS Code catch that. So our cells turned yellow. If we go over here, you'll notice that the debugger looks like VS Code's loading still, but it was flashing. So in a second, we'll actually be able to step through the code and see what that address was that we retrieved.
Give it a little bit more time in Excel before you switch over.
Okay.
Yes, and then go back.
Man, Jakob's a pro. So yeah, you can see that we've got the range address. We could actually flip through and modify code if we wanted to. But yeah, this should get you started with just basic debugging and show you how that works. So I can step over this at this point. And that's what I wanted to demo, at least for this first bit, was just, I find it useful whenever I get started with an environment to figure out the basics of like, how do I get my project set up? How do I start debugging things? And then I can go write my code.
Right.
Yeah. And just to summarize, what Chris is showing here is how to actually go do something with the Excel workbook that's loaded. Yes. And the add-in is next to. And with the context.workbook object, you actually have access to the entire object model that we have available in what we call Office.js, the Office.js API. So we had the question earlier about, can we make charts? This would be where you would actually call an API to add a chart to the workbook. And once that gets executed, and that's what is happening on this context.sync line of code, when the chart will actually be added to the workbook. And when you save the workbook, the chart is there in that workbook. So, yeah.
Yeah. And right now what I'm going to do is actually disconnect because we want to do some fun stuff with functions, and I'm going to demo that really quick because this functions use a different runtime, so you have to change some stuff slightly, and we'll be attaching to different folders. So if you remember, I mentioned that this spins up a web server when we do all of this. As part of debugging, it'll actually kill that web server every single time you hit that run button. So to avoid that, what I'm going to do is on the side, I'm just going to run the dev server here in my PowerShell window. And that way I don't have to worry about spinning it up and paying that very lengthy cost for it to build everything. So that'll spin up in the background, but that's what's actually going to serve the content that we're going to go modify.
Okay.
So the next thing we mentioned was custom functions. The way that custom functions work, there's an HTML file, which is here. The important bit is this line right here with the script source. You'll see that this is pointing to a Microsoft source. It says stuff about custom functions runtime. But this is what we'll be doing a bit of modification, and this is what actually tells the host, hey, here's the version of the runtime that I want to use and what custom functions libraries to use. Where you're going to write most of your source code is in this functions.ts file, which, again, like from my point of view, when I first learned about this stuff being on the team, I thought this was great being a JavaScript developer myself, because immediately I can look at this and this is just JavaScript or TypeScript functions, except the only difference is with a little bit of context and text on the top of this, we can see that it's able to decorate things and actually produce a custom function at the end of the day. And so I'll demo that real quick. And the sleight of hand I'm going to do here is whenever you're debugging custom functions, you'll want to select the custom functions runtime unless you prepare this ahead of time to use what we call the shared runtime. I'm not going to go into that today, but it's something that you can do if you're interested in not having to switch between the different runtimes if you've got an add-in that's doing task pane stuff and functions.
Wicked Blue Ninja asks if when is this going to come out, or is it already out?
Yeah, everything I'm demoing is publicly available right now.
Yeah, and adding to that, everything that Chris has shown so far is out, and it's in general availability. It's not in preview. We at some point we'll start showing things that are in preview, and that's the things related to data types. And it will, come out the moment it's ready to basically come out. But we just want to have more developers outside of Microsoft work with it and see, get that feedback and that usage, and then it will come out. So that's also a call to action for everyone here to try it out.
Cool. Brendan Wood, I wasn't sure if I quite understood his question. If you guys do, feel free to answer. Otherwise, I'll ask him to clarify. But Brendan Wood asked, is there an intention to have Power Automate integration with this to handle the API aspect of the function and leverage all the connectors that exist in that ecosystem?
That's a great question. There is you can do extensibility with Excel and with Power Automate, and that's done through the Excel connectors in Power Automate, and they then connect to Excel. There's connectors that uses the Microsoft Graph API to Excel, which means that you can read and write from an Excel workbook that's in the cloud, yeah, so that's already available.
Cool. Lechifrey asks, how do we add something like APIs, URLs?
That's I'm not sure I understand that question. So maybe Lechifrey can elaborate a little bit.
He follows up asking, is there a config file, and also because of the customer may change URL?
Can I change the URL to the add-in or to something else?
Yeah, Latrice, if you could clarify what you mean with that.
I'm wondering if this is Mads Mikkelsen that we have if that's a real name. Oh, this is a James Bond reference. Sorry for that.
So on the other hand, our server's up and everything's been sideloaded. One thing I did want to mention was I'm going to demo one custom function. It's just the add one. It's funny, we were talking about that in the beginning of like, oh, Excel can do more than add 1 + 1. Well, one of the samples we have is just that, where it adds some stuff just so you can see how it works. But the cool thing I wanted to call out was the different variants of functions we have. In particular, we have this one, which you can see here. It's called function clock, and it's what we call a streaming function. Now, this one I think is super cool because it does more than the built-in ones in the product can do, in that it actually streams live data. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, you can look at this and see that it's just doing a quick set interval, and it's just going to keep incrementing by a second. But what you would see in Excel is you would see that function in the cell just constantly iterating. I haven't built any demos yet using data types in this, but I could imagine there's some pretty cool real world examples where maybe you could stream in data in live real time and do analysis on it. But just something to call out that there's a different sets of functions, but we're mostly going to be focusing kind of on this, the classic style one that many of us are familiar with.
Okay.
Yeah. And now that we're in Excel, again, assuming the demo gods have blessed me today, I can reference our new function, which the first thing to call out with these functions is they all have namespaces on them, which can be defined in the manifest file that I haven't shown you, but if anyone's interested, I can show you what that manifest file looks like. But if we wanted to change this from Contoso, it's one line string change for us to change that. The other thing is that these work just like functions in general with Excel. So if you're familiar with them, it's not really that much of a different user experience, which is great for your end users. It would be weird if all of these functions had like a sort of different inputs or something. So we try to keep it as close to the real stuff as possible.
Right. No, that's very cool.
And what I'm doing here is just adding 1 and 2. And so when I hit enter, awesome. All the demos are working great today. I'm going to jinx myself, but you'll see that the debugger that I attached actually hooked up. And so we can look at what those inputs are, which is, again, something valuable when you're trying to write code in real time. And we'll make some use of some of it in a couple minutes when we start writing our meme function. But from here, you'll see it's pretty simple. We're just adding 1 + 2. The other thing is you'll see a #busy in the cell. But this is Excel's way of saying, hey, I'm talking to a backend somewhere, and I'm waiting for a response. So this will sit here like #busy until we return that. But when I return this, we'll see that the value 3's actually been returned here.
Nice. Are you able to values while you're going through the debugging also?
Yes, you can. So one of the things you can do with a lot of this is you can do stuff on the fly. Sometimes it can be a bit finicky though, which you'll notice me kind of dancing around that today, where I'm worried that I'm going to end up blowing this thing up live, and then I'm going to have to reconfigure stuff. So I'm trying to be as safe as possible. But yeah, you can reconfigure it because the web server will redo stuff on the side, because that's one of the beauties of Webpack.
I think I now understand what Le Chiffre is after with the change of the URL. So I think that just to see if I get it right, the add-in that he or she is imagining is an add-in that calls into a service, and that service has a specific URL, a URL that might change. And the question is, can I put that in the manifest for the add-in so that when it changes, I can just modify it there? I don't think you want to put it in the manifest, because the manifest is also submitted to the store and needs to go through a review process when there's a new submission of the manifest, or you need to deploy it again to the corporate catalog when you change that. And then there's also the question of how you get access to it if it's in the manifest. But what you can do is to maybe let the add-in, as one of the first things that it does on startup, go call a common place where you can hand out that specific URL. So there's one, maybe static place service that you can call and get a URL back, and then use that URL for the remaining calls. I hope that answered the question.
Hope that answers the question, the Shifri. But yeah, thanks I was just about to call that out. But yeah, thanks for responding to that.
And while you guys were talking, one of the things I've set us up with over here is I've deleted all the other functions, because this is going to be our own. We're not using Hello World anymore. This is our new add-in. And so what I've done is I've modified this function definition, which I'm sure if you guys were watching, you saw live. But Basically what we're going to do is we're changing the type of output on this one. So before we were returning a number, in this case, we're actually going to return a type of promise, which is pretty cool because that means, hey, I can go connect to a web service and it's just JavaScript that we're used to using. And in this case, it's actually going to return a 2D array. And the reason for that 2D array is because this is one of the things that tripped me up when I got started with threading Excel add-ins was Excel always expects 2D array structures because it's kind of that two-dimensional grid surface. So something that you'll have to get used to. And sometimes you'll see me today having to like make two-dimensional arrays, and sometimes it might just be a 2D array that only contains single items inside that array. But that allows you to kind of get row and column order. And if none of that made sense, hopefully it makes sense as we demo stuff in a bit.
So
the other thing, go for it.
Because of the nature of Excel, we have to sometimes, we have to always use two-dimensional arrays just to make things neat for us to like interpret and work with. Is that
exactly?
Right?
Yeah, Excel kind of needs to know what to put in the rows and in the
Yes.
columns and in what rows and in what order and so on. And we do that with a two-dimensional array.
And so one of the other things I'm going to do, and this is the last config step, which I think is a testament when we actually finish writing our code to how quickly like you can actually write the code and do things once your configuration is all set up. But what I'm trying to call out is the fact that we are going to be connecting to preview APIs, which I think somebody had asked before about what's generally available. Everything's available. The only caveat to that is the APIs that we're using right now are in preview. And so when you make use of preview APIs in your projects, you have to do a couple things to configure it. And so we're going to run through those steps right now.
Okay.
The first thing, and I'll actually refer to our public page that I have pulled up, is if you go to our general page where it talks about the preview APIs, whole bunch of great information and documentation, but really what you're looking for is this line right here where you're going to install a different NPM package. And so I will go ahead and copy this and then do that. And another terminal window here, and we'll run that.
Yeah. So what Chris is showing now is how you switch the add-in to use the preview APIs rather than the one that are generally available. And you can do that for development, and you can also use those for sort of internal deployments or deployment with specific customers. What you cannot do is to submit an add-in to the store that uses these preview APIs. That requires you to use the ones that are generally available. And this is checks that we do in the store submission process about what APIs are being used by the add-in.
Got it.
And the other thing, oh, go ahead.
He's doing that because he want to show you data types and how functions can
yes
do that.
And the other thing I'm doing right here is in the package.json file, you'll see all of your general dev dependencies and configurations. Once you've run that command, this is one that tripped me up when I did it the first time. You actually want to remove the type definitions for Office.js. So just simply delete that line and save. And then just to be safe, I always do an npm install afterwards to clean everything up. But now at this point, we've told Visual Studio we're going to be using this version of the runtime. And so there's a couple other things we have to change too that I called out before. So hopefully it's not as confusing. The other place we need to make a change is within that functions.html file. So you'll notice we were calling the production APIs or the production runtime here. This one's a pretty easy change where it says 1.1. You just want to change that to beta and then save that, and it'll point to the beta runtimes. Now, since we've done that, I'm going to actually kick off an npm run build because the last thing that we have to change is it's a specific thing for custom functions. And so when you do the npm run build, obviously it's generating a bunch of packages. But one of the magical things that it does is we have this file called functions.json here that you can find in the distribution folder. And this is all of that extra metadata, which it's taken from the descriptions that you had in your source file. But it generates all of the stuff that Excel needs to know to say, like, hey, what are your parameters? What sort of returns is this going to have? But it does it all automatically, which is great because without this, you can imagine it would be pretty tedious to write this by hand. And so you'll see that since the build finished, we don't have all those other definitions, and now we have our new meme function here. And the cool thing is that the result here is going to be, as we call it, a matrix or a two-dimensional array of outputs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the last thing I need to change is we need to add one line, which I'm going to copy from my computer here. And this is another config thing that we're going to do. There's a number of ways you could handle this, but this is how I like to do it. You need to add this line right here at the top that says allow custom data for data type any. Since this is in preview, this basically says, basically we didn't want to download a whole bunch of extra information if you weren't going to make use of this stuff so that your solutions were performant. But this says go ahead and download all of the new data type stuff, and we can use that as inputs and outputs for our custom functions. Now, one of the problems you'll run into is that when that build process goes, it will automatically remove this line. So the way that I'm going to fix that is by actually doing something inside of Webpack. So if I go down into Webpack, there's a specific line that does all of this, and it's right here where it says, hey, I'm going to use this custom functions metadata plugin. I'm going to take an input, and that's our TypeScript source folder, and then the output is that new functions.json file. So since that's going to overwrite every time and we want to manage our own, I'm going to actually write one that's called functions.generated, and then I'm going to add another command which copies things. And so the copy command that I have handy here is down here with this copy Webpack plugin. This basically says do some extra processing and copy different things after we're done. And in particular on this one, I'm going to add this line where we're going to take a functions.json file from our source folder, and we're going to actually paste that one into our distribution as opposed to just taking the one that we had before, since we want to make sure we're manually generating this.
And
so
this way it won't be cleared out.
Exactly. And so now what you've seen me do is, since I wrote that and the build process is going to continually overwrite it, I've copy and pasted that into my source folder. And now if I do an npm run build, it's going to constantly use this one. And as far as configuration is concerned, that's it. We're done configuring everything, and now we can just write our code and start making some memes. Cool. So as far as the code is concerned, I'm going to create one function that's going to do most of the handling of this. And this function I'm just going to call getImages. And so within our function meme, we're going to want to have some memes that we're getting, and then we're going to await that getImages call. Since it's a web service, we'll be using all the async stuff, because obviously we want to make sure that we have the right things being returned.
Yeah,
now,
not only that, but you also want to make sure that as this calculates or gets the data, that Excel remains responsive.
Exactly.
That's a huge benefit of the async custom functions, is that it doesn't stop Excel from doing other things and be responsive to the user.
And as far as the API that I'm going to use, there's a popular website where people generate memes and post them, and a lot of them get shared to Reddit in different places. But it's people in the chat might be familiar, but it's called Image Flip. But I like this website because when I was looking for things to demo with this, they just have a whole bunch of free APIs, which are great. They also have a resource on here where you can kind of generate your own memes, but we're going to use Excel functions to do that, and probably faster than you would on the web page. So in this case, we're going to be calling this API here. Actually, this API here that's called API image flip.getMeme or /getMemes. So I'm going to paste that into my URL field here. And then the return that we're going to have is we want an array of things. So I'll set up this array, and we're going to return those meme entities to Excel. Now, obviously, this wouldn't work right now if I were to go and try to debug it, because we're returning an empty set of stuff, so you'll just get an error. But from here, it's a really simple pattern that has nothing to do with Excel or add-ins, but just this is how you generally fetch stuff using JavaScript on the web, and we're going to use a series of fetch functions. So the first one I'm going to call is my result, which I'll just do a fetch. And actually, I want to await this. So it's async, fetch the URL. And that'll return with either a success or a failure. In my case, I'm pretty confident that it's going to return with a success, but if you were doing this for real and trying to ship it to production, you'd probably want to handle errors. In the interest of time, I'm just going to assume things are working, at least with my code. The next thing we need to do is, once that response comes back, we need to process the JSON. So we'll do another await here. We're going to await the result, get the JSON from it, and that way we can actually leverage it to create entities from. So we'll await that result. And the final thing that we need to do is actually get our memes from that JSON, which should be json.data.memes. And I'm actually going to flip over to Postman. And the reason for that is I wanted to show you guys what the structure of this generally looks like. So if I hit ascend here, this is what the data that we're going to be making use of looks like. So you can see we get this data object. Inside of that, it's got memes, and that's an array. And these have different things associated with them. So one of the things that ImageFilter does is it gives an ID, a name field, and then if I click this, this is that actual meme template. Now you'll notice there's no text on it, which is great. That's what we want because we want to write our own text on top of this. And that's where the field, which is called box count, comes into play. So I'm going to head back over here. Do another request so we can look at that. But there's something called box count, and this tells you how many bits of text you can actually author onto that meme template, which is great. Again, for Excel, we can create a series of functions and pipe these things together. So I'll flip back over here. And the final thing that I need to do before we can run this is actually loop through this stuff and map it to our own structure. If you remember from the beginning, I mentioned that data types have their own schema, and JSON's the format. And so we're going to be applying that schema by using the map function. In this case, I'm going to take in a meme. And what I want to do is the return that we're going to have, and this is where that 2D array thing gets a little wonky. Some of you might be wondering, like, why is he returning a one-dimensional array? The reason is because Excel needs 2D stuff. So what my return value is going to be is every time I'm going to return an array with this new object in it, but it's going to contain a single object. So now I'm defining the data types bits, which we want this to be of type entity. And then we also need a text field for it, which in this case, if I look over here, I'm going to use the name because I think the name of this is actually great. So I can do text meme.name. And then this is what's cool about the map function and the way we designed these APIs is these entities have a properties field. But if you're familiar with the map function, there's this really neat syntax you can use where you just use ... and it's actually going to pull all the fields from that object we've gotten back and just include them in the properties field. And since all of these are just basic text and string, Excel's just going to, our interpreter is just going to, or our parser is just going to handle that, and you don't have to write any extra code. So it's pretty easy to map stuff. Now, where you can run into problems is when you want to do something specific. And in our case, I actually want an image because we want to display that image inside of Excel and be able to include it. And so for that one, I'm going to actually make one more field that I'm hard coding called image. It's going to be of type web image, and then the address that I'll use is that URL which has been returned. So that's most of the code that we have to write here. The last thing I need to do is have meme entities actually be set to that because the map function generates a new array for us. And so what we should hopefully see, and I'll set a breakpoint and I'll kick off a build, set off a breakpoint, and then we can check this out, is we're going to actually see these memes pulled into Excel as entities themselves. And then I've got another demo to kind of wrap things up. All right, it looks like our build was good. So let me hit run one more time. My fingers are crossed because I just wrote a whole bunch of code, and we'll see whether or not it all works.
Yeah, this is where the moment counts.
Right. We'll see how good I am. So we'll do contoso.meme, which is our function. We hit enter. And what do you know? It actually worked.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, I like that one. So if we look over here, you can see those data types I was talking about. We've got all those properties that were included. So box count, height, ID, an actual image of Drake doing the meme thing. And this can all be extracted into Excel. So now, like I said, I'm just using the built-in features of the stuff. So if I want to extract I can extract a single image. If I wanted to extract all of them from this result, it's as simple as doing that.
Can you hit Control+ to make?
Yeah, so you guys can actually see what's going on.
Yeah, that's much better.
So I'm able to extract everything so you can see all the classic meme templates, which brings me to the closing of the code that I was going to write live today. And assuming we still have more time, there's a full scenario that I've got prepared ahead of time where I've crafted all of these functions so that we can actually make and generate our own meme, and then there's some other stuff with it.
We have about 4 minutes. Is that enough?
That should be more than enough. Okay. So I'm going to close this out. We're able to bring that stuff into Excel. We've got our own function, but like I said, I've got my own version of this.
By the way, I know, are we able to do this on Excel Online, or is it just on the desktop?
Yeah, so you can do this in Excel Online, and it should work on Mac too. All right, so really quick, we've got the function. This is the one that we generated. I like to call this one just memes, and this generates all the templates, so you can see a bunch of templates I picked ahead of time. There's another function that maybe we can do another series of this if anyone's interested. I can demo some more of this, but there's another one that I use called Make Meme. And what this does is it takes one of those meme templates and then some text. So you can see right here, I've got one with that disaster girl meme template. And then I've passed in my text fields, calls the data type APIs with my functions. And then this is what I get at the end. And what's cool about this is when I generate these, since it's service connected, this is actually generated live on the web. Which obviously for everyone watching, I don't expect you to be able to type in these parameters and look at this on the web. So the follow-up thing that I did was used another service. And in this case, I used a QR code generator. Again, just kind of showing you how the world of service is available. And with data types, you can do some pretty cool stuff and custom functions. But what this does is it takes one of those entities that we've made as an input, and then it generates a QR code from it. So if anyone has their phone available, you can kind of scan that code and it'll actually take you to the page of it. Wow, nice. Yeah. And so the final thing that I wanted to show was just making our own, which I figured ahead of time. I thought we'll make some love for VS Code because it's an awesome tool, but we can say writing JavaScript without VS Code. And that's kind of the bad thing, right? It's like not nearly as good. And then there's writing JavaScript with VS Code. And in this case, I want to give this one a name, which we'll say writing code. And if I change this field, this will go out to the web. And what you just saw right there was a brand new handcrafted meme that we made live using Excel functions and the add-ins infrastructure and data types. So that's everything that I wanted to show today. I guess while we're kind of waiting and closing, I figured I could cycle through some of the fun ones that I've created ahead of time. But thanks for having me on the show today. No, this has been awesome. I had no idea that things have gotten that advanced and fancy with the work that we can do with Excel. So thanks so much for joining, Jakob and Chris. Anything on the horizon in relation to this work in the future that our viewers can expect? Yeah, I'd say Jakob mentioned this earlier, but some of the things that we demoed are in preview. We're hoping to put these, make these generally available in the near term. One of the things that we're looking for is people to give us some feedback on that or some active usage. And so if this stuff was interesting to you, definitely try it out, but this all should be generally available in the near term. Great. Well, that's it for today. Thanks so much for this demonstration. This has been awesome. And yeah. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. I enjoyed doing this. Thanks for having us. Cool. Yeah, thanks for hosting us. All right, you guys. So that wraps up our presentation for today. So don't forget to check us out on our TikTok and our YouTube channels also. Producer, if you could throw those links up. Chris and Jakob, are there links that you guys want to mention if anyone wants to learn more about this also? Yeah, I've got one more link that actually I forgot to generate a QR code from because I think that's fun. But if you're interested in learning about the APIs in particular, it's called aka.ms/. Actually, is there a quick way for me to type it? I can share it with everyone afterwards. Or if you share my screen, there's a QR code if anyone wants to just scan that. Perfect. Yeah, we see it right now. Well, cool. Well, that wraps it up for today. And you guys, thanks a lot for joining the stream, everyone in the chat. And please see us in our next stream
next week. All right. See everybody later.
Thanks, everyone.